In the 1960s, more than half of Canada's 20 million people were under 25, shaping a country in the midst of explosive change. Behind the image of suburban comfort and growing prosperity, daily life was being transformed by restless youth, rising immigration, and shifting values. What it was like to live in Canada in the 1960s isn't just nostalgia. It's a glimpse into a society on the brink of reinvention. But what did that transformation feel like inside real homes and neighborhoods? And how did it set the stage for today's Canada? By the middle of the 1960s, Canada was a country where youth set the rhythm of daily life. In the northeast corner of Toronto, the Don Mills suburb buzzed with the energy of teenagers who outnumbered their parents. School hallways echoed with the sound of hundreds of sneakers, and every classroom felt packed. On Saturdays, kids like 16-year-old Janet would hop on her bike, transistor radio clipped to her handlebars, the latest Beatles hit from CHUM 1050 crackling through the static. The shopping plaza was the place to be. Bright signs, racks of new fashions, and the sweet smell of popcorn drifting from the bowling alley. At Don Mills Center, groups of friends clustered by the record store window scanning for the newest 45s. Janet's diary from 1965 describes saving up babysitting money for a pink miniskirt, standing in line for a Coke at the soda fountain, and swapping stories about the latest school dance. The mall's chrome fixtures and neon lights made it feel like a piece of the future. And for a few hours, nobody thought about homework or chores at home. Everywhere, the presence of youth was impossible to ignore. More than half of Canada's 20 million people were under 25. That sheer number reshaped neighborhoods and changed what it meant to grow up. School yearbooks from the era show class sizes swelling, with new clubs and sports teams forming just to keep up. After school, some teens delivered newspapers or worked in the mall's shops, while others headed to the roller rink, the clatter of skates and laughter filling the air. Family cars lined suburban driveways, their interiors still smelling of plastic and gasoline. Janet's friends would pile into the back seat of her dad's Chevy for a drive-in movie or a trip to the beach, music blasting from the car radio. For those without a car, the newly extended Metro bus lines offered a ticket to independence, connecting quiet subdivisions to the bright lights of downtown. Evenings at home were shaped by this youth culture too. Parents worried about curfews, about the influence of rock and roll, about changing fashions and new ideas. But for the teenagers, the world felt wide open. Letters and scrapbooks show a generation eager to try new things, ordering pizza for the first time, daring each other to dance in public, or calling into radio contests in hopes of winning concert tickets. This was more than a numbers game. The youth surge brought a new sense of possibility and a hint of rebellion to every corner of Canadian life. In the suburbs, on city streets, and across the airwaves, the sound of young voices was everywhere, pushing the country toward something it had never been before. By the mid-1960s, Canadian homes buzzed with new appliances. Refrigerators, washing machines, and televisions became standard in city and suburban households. The dinner table, once lit by a single bulb, now sat under the glow of molded plastic lamps, while dishwashers and electric mixers promised relief from daily chores. A mother in a housecoat folded laundry fresh from a Maytag. The youngest child glued to black and white cartoons on CBC. Saturday mornings brought the smell of toast and instant coffee, hockey sticks rattling as kids dashed out the door. The car was more than a way to get around. It was a symbol. Suburban driveways filled with Chevrolets and Fords, chrome polished for Sunday drives. Families loaded up station wagons with picnic baskets, heading for provincial parks or roadside attractions. Vinyl seats stuck to bare legs in July, the radio playing the latest pop hits. For many, the car meant freedom, connecting new neighborhoods to city centers and distant relatives. Inside, catalogs from Eaton's and Simpsons promised a modern life. Deep freezers, vacuum cleaners, pressure cookers. By 1965, Over 90% of urban households owned a television, and daily routines shifted around favorite programs. Children set the table during hockey night in Canada. Parents debated the news over supper. The kitchen, once a site of constant labor, became a showcase for gadgets, Tupperware, electric can openers, and countertop blenders lined the counters. Yet these comforts didn't arrive everywhere at once. On a wheat farm near Lethbridge, Alberta, the McLeod family kept a diary of their days. In 1962, the arrival of a second-hand washing machine ended years of scrubbing clothes in a galvanized tub. Harvest still brought long hours and calloused hands, but the radio carried news from distant cities, and electric lights replaced lanterns in the barn. Neighbors exchanged recipes and tips for keeping freezers running through prairie winters. Farm life moved to its own rhythm. Morning started before sunrise with the smell of fresh bread and the distant rumble of a tractor. Children bundled up for the bus. Parents checked livestock or repaired machinery. Evenings gathered everyone around the kitchen table, stories mixing with the static of a hockey game on the radio. Community ties ran deep. Church suppers, 4-H meetings, and harvest bees filled the calendar, even as TV antennas rose above the fields. Across Canada, the comforts of modern life arrived at different speeds. City families marveled at color TV and automatic garage doors, while rural households marked each new appliance as a small victory. Beneath the surface, technology and car culture quietly redrew the boundaries of daily life, shaping how Canadians worked, rested, and imagined the future. Landing records from 1967 tell the story of the Wong family, who arrived in Vancouver from Hong Kong with 2 suitcases and a stack of official papers. Their apartment overlooked the docks, where ships unloaded cargo from Asia and the Pacific. Mrs. Wong found work at a garment factory on Powell Street, sewing buttons for 12 hours a day, her fingers raw by evening. Her husband took shifts at a sawmill, drawn by the promise of steady work and a better future for their children. In the evenings, the family gathered around a small table, practicing English from library books and writing letters home. Their eldest daughter, Lillian, walked to school past signs in 3 languages, learning to balance old traditions with the new world outside. By the mid-1960s, Canada's doors were opening wider. The old system, which had favored arrivals from Britain and Western Europe, was giving way to a new approach. In 1967, the government introduced a points-based immigration system, judging newcomers by skills, education, and work experience instead of country of origin. Immigration officers tallied points for language, age, and training. This shift brought families from India, the Caribbean, and Eastern Europe, changing the faces in school photos and the sounds in city streets. Vancouver's east side filled with new groceries, churches, and community halls, each offering a taste of home. For many, the promise of a better life was tied to new protections. In 1965, the Canada Pension Plan launched, offering workers a safety net for old age. The Medical Care Act followed in 1966, making doctors' visits and hospital stays affordable for families who once paid cash or went without. Enrollment records show thousands of new Canadians signing up for these programs within weeks of arrival. Government pamphlets, printed in multiple languages, explained how to apply for a health card or register for pension benefits. Even for those who struggled with English, the blue and white Medicare card became a symbol of belonging. The expansion of the social safety net touched every corner of Canadian life. In a Montreal apartment building, a Polish widow named Mrs. Kowalski clipped coupons and counted her Canada Pension Plan payments, grateful for the steady income after years of uncertainty. On the factory floor in Hamilton, workers pooled tips on navigating the new system, how to fill out forms, where to find a doctor who spoke their language. Community centers hosted information nights, with volunteers translating government notices and answering questions about taxes, school registration, and the rules for bringing relatives to Canada. Women, too, were finding new footing. In 1967, the Royal Commission on the Status of Women began hearing testimony from across across the country. Letters poured in from nurses, teachers, and factory workers describing unequal pay, limited job options, and the struggle to balance work with family. Draft reports circulated in Ottawa, sparking debate over birth control, maternity leave, and the right to work outside the home. A young mother in Vancouver, working days at a bakery and nights cleaning offices, wrote to the commission about her hopes for childcare and a fair wage. These changes were felt in small, everyday ways. A new Canadian might find a family doctor for the first time, or a grandmother could collect a pension check she never expected. Children translated for parents at the post office, helping them claim benefits or fill out school forms. The laws passed in Ottawa reshaped lives on the ground, turning policy into daily ritual, lining up at the clinic, opening a benefits envelope, or sitting in a crowded classroom beside classmates whose parents had come from half a world away. In the swirl of new faces and new rules, a sense of civic pride began to take root, as families realized that Canada's promises were not just words, but protections they could count on. Winter dusk settled over Ottawa as members of Parliament filed into the House of Commons, their faces drawn and voices hoarse from days of bitter argument. The flag debate had stretched for months, filling Hansard with page after page of speeches about heritage, unity, and what it meant to be Canadian. On December 15, 1964, the chamber held its breath as the final vote was called. Some MPs clutched Union Jack lapel pins. Others wore red maple leaves on their ties. In the public galleries, veterans and school children watched as the tally was read. Canada would adopt a new national flag, a single red maple leaf between two bars of red. For some, it felt like a break with the past. For others, a moment of liberation. Letters poured into newspapers across the country, some mourning the loss of British symbols, others celebrating a new sense of belonging. CBC microphones caught the tension in the chamber, the crackle of applause, and the low rumble of dissent. In the weeks that followed, the new flag appeared everywhere, on school walls and shop windows and stitched onto the backpacks of students. The maple leaf fluttered above city halls and rural post offices, carried by curlers to bonspiels and by hockey teams to tournaments abroad. In Montreal, a young architect named Helene Deschamps pinned a tiny flag to her drafting board. She had grown up in a city shaped by old loyalties and new ambitions. For her, the maple leaf was a promise that Canada could belong to everyone, not just those who traced their roots to Britain or France. The energy of this new identity surged into 1967, Canada's centennial year. Montreal, Helene's city, became the heart of the celebration. Expo 67 rose from the banks of the St. Lawrence, a city of pavilions and walkways built almost overnight. Construction crews worked double shifts. Volunteers sewed banners and planted flowers by flashlight. Moshe Safdie's Habitat 67, an experiment in modern housing, teetered on the edge of disaster as opening day approached. Workers slept on site, waking to the sound of cranes and the smell of wet concrete. When the gates finally opened, crowds poured in. Families, students, tourists from every continent. In just 6 months, nearly 50 million people visited Expo 67, more than twice the population of the country itself. The World's Fair was a living map of Canada's new confidence. Children sampled Belgian waffles and watched astronauts walk on the moon from inside the U.S. pavilion. Young Montrealers like Helene found themselves speaking French, English, and sometimes Italian or Greek in the same afternoon. The city's streets pulsed with music and laughter, and even the skeptical found themselves swept up in the excitement. For many, Expo 67 was proof that Canada could stand on its own. Newspaper columns from the time called it a coming-out party for a country eager to show its modern face. The maple leaf flag flew over every pavilion, its bright red standing out against the blue Quebec sky. Visitors left with souvenirs, pins, postcards, stories of a country that was no longer just a northern echo of Britain or France. As the fair drew to a close, Montrealers lingered along the river, reluctant to let go of the feeling that for one summer, Canada had been at the center of the world. Helene kept her Expo pass tucked in her wallet for years, a reminder of the moment when the country she loved felt both entirely new and unmistakably hers. Anishinaabe elder Mary remembers the day her niece was taken from their home near Lake Winnipeg. In 1965, a social worker arrived unannounced, carrying a clipboard and a letter stamped with a government seal. The family's poverty was cited as reason enough. There was no hearing, no chance to speak. That spring, Ella was sent hundreds of miles away to Kingston, Ontario. The band council's minutes record the removal, but the details fade into bureaucratic silence. Adoption files sealed, letters unanswered for decades. Mary's family gathered for ceremony, waiting for word, but none came. Across the prairies and the north, stories like this multiplied. Provincial welfare agencies, following federal guidelines, removed thousands of Indigenous children in the 1960s. By 1971, more than half the children in Manitoba's care system were Indigenous. The 60s scoop, as it came to be known, tore kinship apart and left wounds that would last generations. In the same decade, Ottawa granted status Indians the right to vote federally in 1960, a policy change celebrated in Parliament. Yet for many, this political gain felt hollow beside the loss of children, language, and belonging. Justice Kimmelman's later report would call out the destruction of records and the erasure of family ties. Mary's story and Ella's absence speak to a truth that policy alone could not mend. In Montreal, the 1960s thundered with the promise of transformation. Jean Lesage's Liberal government swept into office in 1960, promising to shake Quebec free from the grip of the Catholic Church and old guard elites. By 1963, the province had nationalized Hydro-Quebec, turning a patchwork of private companies into a single powerhouse owned by the people. Electricity, once a symbol of English control, now flowed under the fleur-de-lis, lighting up new schools, hospitals, and homes. The Ministry of Education, founded in 1964, stripped the church of its centuries-old hold on classrooms, opening doors for a generation of young Quebecers eager for change. Among them was Luc, a 19-year-old student at the Université de Montréal. His notebooks from 1968 are crowded with political slogans and class notes, side by side. That spring, Luc joined hundreds of others occupying campus buildings, demanding a voice in how universities were run. "We are the future of Quebec," he wrote, "not the priests, not the businessmen." The energy spilled into the streets. Marches for McGill Francais drew thousands, calling for Montreal's English-speaking university to serve the French majority. Newspapers filled with photos of students waving banners, police in riot gear, and crowds chanting for equality and respect. The quiet revolution was anything but silent. Fertility rates plunged as young families rejected old expectations. New laws gave civil servants the right to strike, and union power surged. The old order, built on obedience and hierarchy, gave way to a society that prized education, secularism, and Quebecois pride. For Luc and his friends, the dream was not just a better Quebec, but a society run by and for its own people. The rest of Canada watched as the province claimed its place, no longer content to follow someone else's script. By the mid-1960s, more than half of Canada's 20 million residents were under 25. This unprecedented youth surge shaped home life, work, and national priorities. The adoption of the maple leaf flag in 1965, the launch of Medicare in 1966, and landmark events like Expo 67 all signaled a modernizing nation. Yet government files and testimony show that these advances came alongside deep challenges. The beginnings of the 60s scoop, the quiet revolution in Quebec, and ongoing regional divides. Not all records from this period are public, and historians note that the full impact of Indigenous child removals remains understudied. The policies, programs, and social changes of the 1960s laid the foundations for today's multicultural Canada, but also left unresolved questions about belonging and justice. The legacy of this decade is visible in Canada's symbols and institutions, and in the debates that continue to shape its identity.